My best friend's husband. What if love chose the wrong person? Chapter 1. The man who was always waiting. Jeff had learned how to wait. He waited for Rose to come home. He waited for her phone calls. He waited for the rare evenings when she would put everything aside and simply spend time with him. Tonight was no different. It was almost midnight. Jeff sat alone in the living room staring at the untouched dinner on the table. He had prepared it hours earlier, believing Rose would be home by 8. His phone remained silent, then finally it vibrated. A message. Rose, don't wait for me. I'm out with the girls. I'll be late. Jeff read it twice. He wanted to ask where she was. He wanted to tell her that he had been waiting. Instead, he typed, Jeff, okay, enjoy yourself. He placed the phone down. For several seconds, he stared at the floor. Then he whispered to himself, how long can a person keep loving someone who never has time to love them back? He immediately regretted saying it, because despite everything, Jeff still loved Rose. He had married her believing they would build a life together. Rose had once been his whole world, but lately, he was beginning to wonder whether he was still part of hers. Across town, Rose was laughing with her friends. She loved going out. She loved vacations, parties, beautiful restaurants, and spontaneous plans. Sitting beside her was Lulu, one of her closest friends. Lulu had been watching Rose carefully all evening. Finally, she asked, Rose, when was the last time you actually spent a full day with Jeff? Rose laughed. Why are you asking me that? Because he's your husband. I know. And he loves you. Rose looked away. I love him too. Lulu sighed. Then show him. Rose didn't answer. She simply picked up her glass and changed the subject. But Lulu knew something Rose didn't want to admit. Jeff was tired, and sometimes a heart doesn't break all at once. Sometimes it slowly becomes tired of waiting. Chapter 2. Chapter 2. The life Rose didn't notice. The next morning, Jeff woke up early. Rose was still sleeping. He looked at her for a moment. Even after everything, he still found her beautiful. He quietly got out of bed and went downstairs. He prepared breakfast. When Rose finally came down, she was already dressed. You're leaving? Jeff asked. Yes, I'm meeting the girls. Jeff looked at the breakfast. I thought maybe we could spend the morning together. Rose checked her phone. Another time, Jeff, he forced a smile. Sure. She kissed his cheek. Don't be upset. I'm not. She walked away. The front door closed. Jeff stood alone in the kitchen. He looked at the breakfast he had prepared, then he quietly sat down. He wasn't angry. That was the problem. He had become so used to disappointment that disappointment no longer surprised him. Later that afternoon, Lulu called him. Jeff, hey, are you okay? He smiled. I'm fine. Oh, you don't sound fine. Jeff was silent. Then he finally said, I'm just tired. Lulu understood. Rose needs to realize what she has. Jeff didn't answer. He didn't want anyone to speak badly about his wife, even when he was hurting. That was the kind of man he was. He protected Rose even when Rose wasn't protecting their marriage. And somewhere deep inside, he still hoped she would eventually notice. Chapter 3, Lulu's Warning. That evening, Lulu confronted Rose. You're going to lose him. Rose looked at her in disbelief. Excuse me? Jeff. Rose crossed her arms. Why does everyone suddenly care about my marriage? Because you don't. The words were harsh, but Lulu meant every one of them. Rose looked away. I have a life, Lulu. So does Jeff. I can't spend every minute with her. No one asked you to. Lulu lowered her voice. He's not asking for every minute. He's asking for some of them. Rose became quiet. Lulu continued. Take him somewhere. Have dinner with him. Talk to him. Ask him how he feels. Rose sighed. You're making this bigger than it is. No, I'm warning you before someone else has to. Rose looked at her. What do you mean? Lulu paused. Nothing. Just don't take Jeff for granted. Rose said nothing, but that night she went home earlier than usual. Jeff was sitting on the couch. She sat beside him. Can we watch something together? Jeff looked surprised. Really? She smiled. Really? For a few hours, they laughed. They talked. They remembered why they had fallen in love. Jeff went to bed that night feeling hopeful, but the next morning, Rose returned to her usual life, and Jeff returned to waiting. Chapter 4. The woman Jeff had never noticed. A few weeks later, Rose organized another gathering with her friends. Lulu was there, so were Farah, Dania, and Elite. And then Natasha arrived. Jeff had seen her before, but they had never really spoken. She smiled. Hi, I'm Natasha. Jeff. They shook hands. It lasted only a second. But Natasha noticed something. Jeff barely spoke. He stayed close to Rose, watching her while she talked with everyone else. Rose was laughing. Jeff was smiling at her, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. Later, Natasha found herself sitting near him. You don't talk much, do you? Jeff smiled. Only when I have something to say. She laughed. Well, then I'll have to find something worth answering. Jeff laughed. It was a small moment, nothing inappropriate, nothing romantic, just two people talking. But Lulu saw it. She watched Natasha. Then she watched Jeff. And something about the way they looked at each other made her uncomfortable. Not because anything had happened, because sometimes the beginning of a story is nothing more than a simple conversation. Chapter 5. Someone who listened after that day. Natasha didn't chase Jeff. She didn't call him. She didn't flirt with him. She respected the fact that he was married to her friend. But when they were all together, she noticed him. One afternoon, Jeff was unusually quiet. Natasha sat nearby. You okay? I'm fine. She smiled. You always say that. Because I am. Maybe. Jeff looked at her. What does that mean? It means sometimes people say they're fine because they don't want anyone to ask more questions. Jeff was silent. No one had said that to him before. Natasha didn't push. She simply changed the subject. They talked about music, travel, dreams, things Jeff hadn't talked about in a long time. When he got home that evening, he realized something. He had spent 2 hours talking to Natasha. And for those 2 hours, he hadn't felt lonely. That thought frightened him because he knew exactly who she was, Rose's best friend. And he was Rose's husband. Chapter 6. The first message. A few days later, Jeff's phone vibrated. It was Natasha. Natasha, hope you had a good day. Jeff stared at the message. He shouldn't have smiled, but he did. Jeff, thank you. I hope you did too. She replied, Natasha, I did. That was it. No flirting, no secrets, no inappropriate conversation. Yet Jeff kept looking at the screen. He put the phone down, then picked it up again. He read the message one more time. Meanwhile, Rose was preparing for another weekend trip with her friends. She barely noticed Jeff's silence. She didn't notice how often he sat alone. She didn't notice that his expectations were disappearing. She didn't notice that another woman had begun to notice the things she ignored. And that was the beginning of the real problem. Chapter 7. The moments Rose never gave him, Natasha and Jeff began talking more often. Never for hours, never in secret, just enough to know each other better. She discovered that Jeff loved quiet mornings. He loved old music. He dreamed of traveling more. He wanted a peaceful home. He wanted someone who would sit beside him at the end of a difficult day and simply ask, "How was your day?" One evening, Natasha said, "You deserve to be happy, Jeff." He looked at her. "Everyone deserves that." "No, I mean you." He smiled sadly. "You don't know what I deserve." "Maybe I know more than you think." Jeff looked away. There was something dangerous about the kindness in her voice, not because Natasha was doing anything wrong, but because Jeff had started looking forward to seeing her, and he knew that was a line he couldn't cross. Chapter 8. The question. One night, Natasha sent Jeff a message. "Natasha, can I ask you something?" Jeff. "Sure." There was a long pause, then Natasha. "Are you happy with Rose?" Jeff stared at the question. He didn't answer. A minute passed, and then 5. Finally, he wrote, "Jeff, I love my wife." Natasha replied, "Natasha, that wasn't my question." Jeff closed his eyes. She was right. He finally typed, "Jeff, I don't know." Natasha didn't answer immediately. Then Natasha, "Maybe you should ask yourself why." Jeff put the phone down. He knew he needed distance, so he wrote, "Jeff, you're Rose's friend. I don't want our friendship to become a problem." Natasha answered, "Natasha, I understand." But neither of them slept peacefully that night, because sometimes a question can reveal more than a confession. Chapter 9. Rose notices the change. For the first time, Rose noticed that Jeff wasn't always available. One evening, she asked, "What are you doing tomorrow?" "I have plans." Rose looked surprised. "With who?" "Friends." "Which friend?" Jeff smiled. "Why?" "I'm just asking." He didn't argue. He simply said, "You're welcome to come." Rose didn't know why the invitation bothered her. She had always told Jeff to have his own life, but now that he was beginning to have one, she suddenly wanted to know everything about it. Later, Lulu asked, "Are you jealous?" Rose immediately said, "No." Lulu smiled. "Then why are you asking so many questions?" Rose didn't answer, because deep down she was afraid. She was afraid that the man she thought would always be there might finally discover what life felt like without her. Chapter 10. The laugh she had forgotten at another gathering, Rose was distracted by her phone. Jeff was talking with everyone. Natasha told a funny story. Jeff laughed, really laughed. Rose looked up. She hadn't heard that laugh in a long time. She watched him. Then she watched Natasha. There was no touching, no flirting. Nothing she could accuse them of, just two people enjoying a conversation. But Rose felt something in her chest. Jealousy, fear, regret. She turned to Lulu. "Do Jeff and Natasha talk a lot?" Lulu looked at her. "They're friends." "Just friends?" Lulu smiled. "Why? Are you worried?" Rose didn't respond. For the first time, she realized something terrifying. She had spent years believing Jeff would always wait for her. What if he stopped? Chapter 11. The Line. Natasha knew she was becoming emotionally attached, so she tried to create distance. But every time she saw Jeff, it became harder. One evening, they were briefly alone. Jeff looked at her. Natasha, I know. You know what? We need to be careful, he nodded. You're Rose's best friend, and you're her husband. Silence filled the room. Jeff looked down. I don't want to hurt anyone. Neither do I. Natasha took a step back. That's why we need boundaries. Jeff looked at her. You matter to me. Her eyes became emotional, but I don't want to be the reason your marriage ended. She walked away. Jeff remained where he was. For the first time, he understood that the situation wasn't about attraction anymore. It was about emotions, and emotions were harder to control. Chapter 12. Lulu knows Lulu finally spoke to Natasha. Do you have feelings for Jeff? Natasha didn't answer. Lulu sighed. Your silence tells me everything. Natasha looked down. I never planned this. I know. I never asked him to choose me. I know. I don't want to betray Rose. Lulu looked at her carefully. Then protect yourself before this becomes something you can't control. Natasha's eyes filled with tears. I think it's already too late. Lulu said nothing because she knew Natasha wasn't a bad person, but she also knew that good people could still make painful choices. Meanwhile, Rose had begun to sense that something was wrong. She didn't know what, but she could feel it, and soon she would ask the question everyone had been avoiding. Chapter 13. Rose asked the question. That night, Rose confronted Jeff. Are you hiding something from me? Jeff looked at her. No, you're different. Maybe I'm tired. Tired of what? Jeff remained silent. Rose's voice became softer. Tired of me? Jeff looked away. That silence broke something inside her. Rose whispered, Is it Natasha? Jeff looked at her. Oh? Do you have feelings of her? He couldn't answer, and that was enough. Rose began to cry. I trusted you. Jeff's voice was quiet. I never cheated on you. But you think about her. Jeff looked down. I can't lie to you. Rose wiped her tears. How long? I don't know. Do you love her? Jeff took a breath. I don't know. Rose stared at him. For the first time, she understood that the danger wasn't necessarily another woman. The danger was that her husband had become emotionally exhausted long before she noticed. Chapter 15. The choice. Jeff knew he had to make a decision, not between Rose and Natasha, between the life he was living and the life he truly wanted. He met Rose. I loved you with everything I had, Rose cried. I know, but I can't keep being the only person fighting for this marriage. She looked at him. Is she the reason? Jeff shook his head. No. And then why? Because the problems were already there. Rose lowered her eyes. He continued. Natasha didn't create the emptiness between us. Rose began to cry. You stopped filling it. The words hurt, but they were true. Jeff left that night without choosing Natasha. He needed time. Natasha respected that. She never pressured him. She simply waited. Not because she expected him to choose her, but because she finally understood that real love couldn't begin with someone else's broken heart. Chapter 16. What if love chose the wrong person? Weeks passed. Jeff and Rose were no longer together. The divorce was painful. But slowly, both began to understand that sometimes ending a relationship is not the same as destroying a life. Natasha stayed away. She gave Jeff the space he needed. One evening, Jeff called her. "Can we talk?" They met at a quiet cafe. Natasha looked nervous. Jeff smiled. "I didn't call you here to ask you to wait for me." She looked at him. "I know. I called because I finally understand what I feel." Natasha remained silent. Jeff continued. "I don't want you to be a replacement for Rose. I don't want that either. I don't want our story to begin because my marriage ended." Natasha smiled softly. "Then why are you here?" Jeff looked directly into her eyes. "Because even after all this time, you're still the person I want to talk to." Natasha's eyes filled with emotion. She smiled, but neither of them rushed. There was no kiss, no dramatic promise, just a quiet moment between two people who had survived a complicated beginning. Across town, Rose sat alone with an old photograph of herself and Jeff. She stared at it for a long time. Then she whispered, "Maybe I didn't lose him because of her." A tear rolled down her cheek. "Maybe I lost him because I stopped seeing him." The narrator's voice becomes softer. Sometimes love arrives at the wrong time. Sometimes it finds the wrong people. And sometimes the person who opens your heart is the person you were never supposed to love. But the hardest question is not who does he love? The hardest question is, what would you do if the person your heart chose was the one person you were never supposed to choose? The brief silence. Then the title appears, My Best Friend's Husband. What if love chose the wrong person? End of season 1.